Hi, and welcome to Cover Stories. I'm Carrie Walbrin, and I am here today with best-selling author Jason Oman, who is the author of the book Conversations with Millionaires. And we are so excited to talk to you today, Jason. Thanks for being here with us.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, no problem. I wanted to just jump right into some things that stood out to me about the book and want to find out just what was your motivation about the book. So let's just start there with what made you decide to take all of these conversations with some fascinating people, millionaires in their own right, and put them into a book for everybody to read.
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of an interesting story because what happened was I was in a previous business, and this goes back, like 8 years ago now, and I was in a previous business and kind of got to a point where I really wasn't having fun doing the business anymore. I was making good money, but kind of wasn't feeling like the passion, and kind of my heart wasn't into it enough. So I said, you know what, I want to do something that I really feel good about doing and am passionate about. So I quit doing that business and then was looking for something else to do. And I decided what I wanted to do was I wanted to build an information marketing business. And I wanted to build that business and kind of launch it with a book. I said, if I'm going to do a book, let's do a big book. Let's do something big. So I was in the process of sitting at my computer, kind of writing a book the old-fashioned way. And, that can be kind of a long, drawn-out process, right?
Right.
So sitting there at my computer, kind of working on the book, and I had this interesting thought. I said, once I actually finish writing this book, that's when the work begins, really, because I'm still going to have to market and promote this thing to actually get sales and stuff. So I said, it's interesting because this book would be so much easier to sell if I was already a best-selling author. Thinking like Stephen King and John Grisham and all these guys, right, or girls. J.K. Rowling is a great example of, somebody who, they're already a best-selling author. So when they come out with another book,
people are waiting for it.
People are ready and waiting. It's like they're already pre-selling the book before the thing's even ready.
Right.
So I said, I was thinking in my head, this would be a lot easier of a book to sell if I was already a best-selling author. But then the thought hit my head, and this is all kind of my internal dialogue kind of happening here. So what happened was I was sitting there thinking, this would be a lot easier to sell if I was already a best-selling author. But I'm not a best-selling author, and it's not like you can just become a best-selling author.
Right.
Wait a minute.
And that was the light bulb.
The aha moment. It was like, wait a minute, who said you can't just become a best-selling author? And I said, well, if I could just become a best-selling author, how would I do it? And that brings up a very interesting point, which is the point about the power of asking yourself the right kind of questions. So by asking myself that question, what I then did is I turned to my bookshelf where I had a whole bunch of different best-selling books on my bookshelf. And one of the books on my bookshelf was a book that my roommate at the time had put on my bookshelf wanting me to read. And to this day, I've still never gotten around to reading it, which is interesting. But the book was Conversations with God. So now, 3.5 years prior to that point, there was a guy that I knew in Long Island. I was living in California at the time. He was living in Long Island, and he had a little he had a show on a little radio station, little AM station, like 2 watts. If you weren't in the parking lot of the radio station, you weren't even going to be able to hear the thing.
But he had a radio station.
But he had a radio show on this station, and he interviewed his idols and his mentors, people that he had studied and read their books and listened to their audio programs and stuff like that. So he brought on these people and he interviewed them on his radio show. Now, I was living in California at the time, so what I used to actually do, because these were people I had studied, these were mentors of mine and stuff as well. Very successful people, very smart, like educators on the world of success, because we don't learn that stuff in school, right? So anyway, I used to call up the radio station and have the producer put me on hold at the radio station in Long Island. So here I am 3,000 miles away in California. I would call up the radio station, the producer would put me on hold, because when you're on hold at a radio station, the radio show is piped through the phone line.
And were you on hold waiting to talk to these people that were already your mentors?
No, I was just on hold just to hear the show. I'm like, wow, he's going to interview one of my own mentors too. I want to hear this interview. So I'd just call up and just sit there and listen for 30, 45 minutes and listen to the whole show.
And are those the people that you were calling and hearing this radio show, if we fast forward now, are those the people that we find in this book?
Absolutely.
All right,
yes.
So that's how it came full circle to finding these interviews with these, like you said, fascinating people that most people have heard of. These aren't, people that we're just now discovering in the book. It's people that you say their names and we all know that they've been successful and we want to hear their story. And one thing I loved about this book is that it's like getting excerpts or pieces of each of their books, or it's the highlights of what they have to offer.
Exactly.
Were you surprised when you put it all together with all of these different self-made millionaires and success stories? Were there any surprises or any similarities, or was everyone very different in what they had to offer? What did you take away from seeing it all put together in one book like this?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's interesting because what I found is that sometimes really in the whole world of just being successful, there are some common principles and kind of laws of success, if you will. And so there's a lot of commonalities, but what I find is that different people explain and educate on those concepts in different ways. So they'll use different words to explain them, for example.
Right.
So everybody's really kind of using their own words to describe different things, and maybe they call the principle something else and stuff like that. But what happens is when you hear a lesson and it's delivered to you from different people in different ways, using different words,
right.
but to explain some of the same concepts, it helps you internalize those
right.
lessons. And really, it impacts you at such a deeper level,
right.
and allows you to become the person who can then take advantage of those principles.
Right. And I think that's one of the beauties of it, is that you are getting different styles, different lessons learned, and so instead of going out and having to read 8 books, and like you said, sometimes they sit on the shelf, you get to get the highlights of each of those and really grab something different from each person's perspective. And I'm sure, just as you learned a lot from these different people, that a lot of people will learn a lot from you in this book by putting it all together. So
yeah, it's been a very powerful experience. I really, I'm kind of like one of the few authors that refers to his own book.
Right.
I literally, my book, not in just putting it together, but in different stuff I've done to build my businesses, I've been able to to refer back to my own book,
right.
and use it kind of as a guiding, map,
great.
if you will. So.
Well, I know we have a lot more we want to cover, but right now we're going to wrap up for this segment of Cover Stories. But I hope you'll stay with us, because we're going to come back and talk to Jason Oman about some more things about the book and some other things that he's doing that I think you'll find fascinating. So we'll be right back. Hi, and we are back with Cover Stories. I'm Carrie Walvren, and we are talking with Jason Oman, who is the best-selling author of Conversations with Millionaires. And Jason, when we left off, we had just talked about the whole idea or concept that you have for this book, and just starting to get into the people that are in the book and what they have to tell us about their successes and how they found themselves millionaires and how they got into those situations. And I just wanted to ask you a few questions, just based on my take from the book and some interviews that I found really fascinating.
Okay.
In Chapter 3, you talked to someone that we all probably recognize the name of, Wally Amos, of famous Amos Cookies. Right. And one thing that really stood out to me is that he talked about that people should be passionate about whatever they're doing. I think sometimes people struggle with, they're in a job, they're not passionate about it, and they have this idea that they are passionate about, and then they don't do anything. And he talks about just do something. Right. And you talked about that you were, wanting to make a change from what you're doing. How did that happen with you, that you just did it? You made this transition, and you went out there, and now you are doing what you're passionate about. Right.
I think there's this is kind of a writer-downer kind of thing here.
Okay.
So anybody watching, I really recommend writing this down. And the kind of initials for it are A, B, C, P. And it's action before path.
Okay.
Okay. So what that means is basically, you don't need to know all the different steps that you're going to take. You just need to start taking action.
Okay.
So a lot of people, they're worried about taking action, and they procrastinate for